stop slipping, and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Starting this month, I'll be doing monthly Q&A videos on the channel. So if you have a football boot related question that you'd like me to potentially answer, I'll be pulling questions for that video from this one, so leave them down in the comment section. Thanks. Okay, you can drop them now. Even though it seems like it'd be a guaranteed win, it doesn't seem like Nike is ever going to give us a true Hypervenom Phantom 4, but they are definitely sticking with the Phantom concept that, as of late, has kind of been an up and down roller coaster. It's gone from really good to just okay to kind of underwhelming to nobody asked for that to really good again, and then back to a place where I think people were more or less indifferent. Where with this latest Phantom model, other than the styling, which I know a lot of people are on the fence about, although give it time. I think in more colorways, this design will actually grow on people. Nike have done something that they don't normally do, and that is listen to consumers. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Nike Phantom 6 Elite. These being the highs, which in launch form retail for $290, and these are the highs, which retail for $305, although I'm hopeful that the general release colorways will drop down to the usual $260 for the lows and $285 for the highs. With both of these boots technically being all new designs, however, every single element feels like it's been recycled from a past Phantom models, predominantly the last 2 generations in the GX1 low and mid, along with the Luna 1, Luna 2, and GX2, where you can almost view the Phantom 6 as the all-star team of all the best features from the grip knit era of Nike Phantoms, other than the inclusion of the Cyclone 360 studs in the forefoot, because let's be honest, that's one element that nobody was really asking to come back. It's not Nike's usual way of doing things, but the end result is 2 pretty good football boots that one could argue are the best grip knit Nike Phantoms to date. Where I know there's going to be plenty of people that'll probably disagree with me on this, but if you're not into the Mercs, I really don't think that Nike football has had very many interesting products over the last couple of years compared to all the other amazing alternatives out there from other brands. However, the Phantom 6 has me excited like I was back in 2022 when the Phantom GX1 came out, and like I just said, I think these might actually be better. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, watch the entire review, and if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick these up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. And really quickly, if you enjoy the reviews, don't forget to drop a like on the video, and if you appreciate the unsugar-coated, unsponsored, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Starting with the upper, if you've worn any of the grip knit era Phantoms, then you pretty much know what to expect here. Nike have not changed up the formula that they originally introduced in 22 with the GX1, and I think that's actually a good thing. The grip knit material is basically their fly knit, but incorporated into the yarn itself is this grippy silicone material that gives the surface of the upper a relatively sticky feel on the ball that isn't necessarily too harsh, but definitely takes some getting used to. But because of all that extra friction, there is this sensation of quote unquote control. Now, I'm not saying that these will improve your touch on the ball, but certainly the added grip on the ball itself does give you this sensation of having a little bit more control. Again, if that's your, I guess for lack of a better term, cup of tea, because for some people having extra grip on the upper is just something that they don't like whatsoever. If that's you, just like GX1, GX2, Luna 1, and Luna 2, Phantom 6 probably isn't for you. For me personally though, I really like the grip that these provide. Again, it does take some getting used to coming from other football boots outside of the Phantom line, but once you get used to that additional grip, both controlling the ball and particularly when shooting the ball, I think just having that extra friction on the upper just allows you to control spin just that little bit more easily, or even generate more spin, which in turn will result in a more controlled feel. Whether or not that's actually reality quality though is something you can never really account for. Something I'll also applaud Nike for on this particular football boot that I've criticized them in the last several generations of Phantom is the grip knit is more or less undisturbed. You can see everything here in this kind of teal green color along with the orange is fully exposed grip knit, with the only elements that aren't being the small Nike swoosh right here and the small Nike swoosh right there, which are so small and so out of the way that you don't feel the obstruction whatsoever. Historically, they've put a large Nike swoosh covering up the grip knit material itself and therefore giving you less grip on the ball, which is the exact opposite of the whole point of this technology. So I like the fact that they've gone with this minimal branding in the grip knit area of the upper. And as far as other changes go, it now has a little bit of a ridge texturing, and you can see here in the orange area there's a little bit of buildup of material where it's slightly thicker, but in general the grip stays the same across the entire foot and the feel stays the same across the entire foot. You really don't feel the ridging. The upper for the most part is relatively thin but still has that little bit of cushion because it is nice and pliable, and like I said, the grip is pretty much as good as it gets in terms of what's currently on offer in the football boot industry. Focusing specifically on the low cut version of the Phantom 6, you'll see the return of the mini lace cover slash shroud that was originally introduced on the Phantom GX1 that basically allows this grip knit material just to cover up the bottom section of the lacing system. It's only about that much, but it is kind of a cool design element, and it does give this boot a little bit of a unique look and allows that grip knit to extend slightly further up the foot without making the lacing system more shallow, because the shallower you make the lacing system, the less adjustability you're going to have, and in turn, the fit will usually suffer. So I like that design element, and I'm happy that they brought it back. Where the high cut version not only gives you the mid-cut collar, it also gives you this giant lace cover that of course hides the lacing system, but not just a lace cover, you actually get some of that grip knit material highlighted here in green running across the top of the foot that isn't there on the lows. So in terms of actually benefiting the control of the football boot, if again we want to equate extra grip with better control, there is legitimately a benefit to the mid-cut variation this time around, rather than just aesthetics and $25 less in your pocket. Where again, in the past, I've criticized lace covers for just adding more material across the top of the foot and saying that it offers a cleaner touch. That's still technically true here on this mid-cut variation, in that when you add more material, there is now more between your foot and the ball. But the fact that they've utilized some of that space with legitimately grippy texture on the surface of the upper, I can now kind of justify the mid-cut variation, and I do actually really like having the ability to just tuck the laces under the lace cover, have it completely out of the way, and not have to worry about them flopping around. I'm somebody that likes to tuck the laces into the side of the upper, so not having to do that with the mid-cut variation is actually pretty nice. And of course, with the lace cover variation, you are going to have a little bit of a difference in the lacing system, which again is taken directly from the mid-cut variation of the GX1, where there are some nylon lace loops that run all the way down the same length as the low cut variation, which is very, very important. So it still runs super deep. Of course, doing it this way does make adjusting them a little bit trickier, where you don't have access to pull each section individually. You pretty much just have to pull from the top. But because of how it's designed, it does a pretty good job of pulling tension all the way through. And of course, having this lace cover along with the mid-cut collar does make putting these on significantly more difficult than the low cut variation. But once you get your foot in the boot, tie the laces tight, and have yourself all set up, I really do like the clean aesthetic of the laces being completely tucked away. Where the lows, again, just like the GX1, just feature some elasticated fly knit across the top of the foot. It utilizes a dual lace hole setup like so many one-piece upper football boots do these days, and in general, just give you a little bit more of a connected sensation to the football boot, in that you technically have one less layer of material. I don't necessarily think that the touch feels that different between these two football boots. And again, with the laces tied tight, one could argue that the low cut variation seems to fit that little bit tighter because of how the laces are fixed to the upper. But in general, after a little bit of wear time, I really didn't notice a significant difference between these two in terms of the way that they fit, the lockdown that they provided, and therefore the overall comfort on offer. Effectively meaning that a huge factor in trying to decide between these two is really going to come down to whether or not you prefer that low cut aesthetic or you like the look and feel of a mid-cut collar, which truly offers no performance benefit. There is no ankle support provided here. I know for use on artificial grass, which this FG stud pattern is not well suited for, it can help with not letting the rubber pellets get inside of the boots. So for that application, I totally understand it, but simply for the extra $25, are you genuinely getting better performance from the mids over the lows? Again, you can make the argument that you have a little bit of extra grip across the top of the foot, which I think is more justification for a mid-cut Nike boot than ever before. But in all honesty, you'll be able to play just as well in either version. And then one last comment on the upper before moving on is this very clear Hypervenom Phantom 1 nod in the form of this backwards Nike swoosh that maybe doesn't come across in pictures all that well. Hopefully you can see it in the video. It's made from like this hard plastic that legitimately has really sharp spikes. If I just press my thumb into this Nike swoosh, you can see what it does to my thumb. This is something that if it came across someone's face just from like a high kick situation or something like that, I think this would legitimately cut somebody pretty bad. I'm surprised this was allowed, but then again, I'm pretty sure nobody that governs football boots, if that's even a thing, inspected these before release, but it's one of those things that I'm a little bit surprised again at just how sharp and rough this is. Moving to the rear, this is an area where I don't think they've really changed all that much coming from Luna 2 and GX2, where the low cut model of course gives you this low cut opening with a little bit of elasticated flyknit bordering the edges. The mid cut model of course gives you that collar, but the general heel construction is exactly the same on these two football boots. So from a lockdown and comfort perspective at the back of the boot, again, there is no difference between these two. They've also maintained that relatively low heel structure, so it's very hard down low, but across the back, it's very flexible, which is a common thing amongst pro-issued football boots, or at least has been for a very long time. And it's nice to see that Nike is doing that on their retail variations as well. It just makes the shaping and general break-in of the football boot a lot more forgiving, so I appreciate that they've done that here, and I think it feels quite good. Internally, the heel liner is this really soft microfiber material with plenty of padding. The shaping and the lockdown I thought was quite good on both of these boots, but I really didn't have an issue with it on past Phantom models either, so no major changes there. And then as far as the insole is concerned, I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It's fully removable, however, you'll notice that when you pull it out, it's a little bit harder than before, and that's not because of the insole itself. It's the usual mesh liner on the surface, and it's made from a single layer of this yellow foam. Again, not uncommon for a high-end Nike boot, but if you look inside, the underside of the sole plate, which is where the insole sits, has these clear grip elements all the way through to stop it from sliding around. And technically you can see there is a ring of yellow glue kind of around the toe box area, so that's helping to hold the insole in as well. But in general, if insole slippage is something that you've historically struggled with, again, I never really thought it was an issue on the Phantom line, it's nice that they've thought of that with this particular design. Moving to the base, you're going to find all new sole plate tooling for the FG variation of the Phantom 6, where the sole plate more or less feels, again, like a return of what they had on the GX1, which is not unresponsive, but certainly more flexible than what we had on GX2, which is basically just recycled from Phantom Luna 1, which was not a pair of football boots that people generally liked all that much. And I would say that the GX2 sole plate, while it wasn't bad, it just had some awkward stiffness to it in the way that it flexed. This, I think, feels a lot more natural and works really well with what is a more sock-like pliable feel to this grip knit upper. So again, nothing special, but definitely an improvement as far as I'm concerned. As far as the FG stud pattern is concerned, it's kind of like a hybrid of what we had from the GX1 and of course what was introduced on Phantom Luna, where if I hold up a GX1 sole plate with the FG stud pattern, you can see that the 4 studs under the forefoot as well as 2 of the heel studs are directly taken from this football boot exactly down to their position. And then of course they've incorporated the blades at the back of the heel from that Phantom Luna / GX2 sole plate, and of course the Cyclone 360 setup at the tip of the toe that is supposed to prioritize rotational movements, but as we know, when you put bladed studs on any football boot, those blades dig into the ground and cling, so it effectively, from a feel and performance perspective, pretty much does the exact opposite of what Nike claims, which is still kind of a weird one that they're going with that. And again, with so many people wearing FG boots on artificial grass these days, which I do not recommend, especially with this stud pattern, having blades as your rotational element is just such a bad idea. However, if you're using your FG Phantom 6s on natural grass as they were intended, I actually think the traction is really good. Again, not a huge difference from what we had in the previous generation Phantom GX2 or Luna 2 in terms of overall grip, but I think with the better flexibility or more natural flexibility of this sole plate, in general, it just seems to feel better. It's the only way that I can describe it. It's not a huge gain or loss from a grip standpoint, and certainly this trends in more of a speed boot direction as far as the layout is concerned. You definitely have more conical studs now than you did before, but overall, as long as you like a relatively aggressive stud pattern, you shouldn't have any issues with this setup. And then there's the weight, where given all the changes and similarities, is there any significance between the Phantom GX2 and Luna 2 that the Phantom 6 low and high replace? We're about to find out, all in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start with the lows, the GX2 Elite specifically, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.85 ounces, the equivalent of 194 grams. Change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the Phantom 6 Elite lows, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.9 ounces, the equivalent of 195 grams, 1 gram more than the GX2, effectively nothing. Then we'll throw on the mid-cut Luna 2 Elite, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 205 grams. Change the scale back to ounces one last time, and we'll throw on the Phantom 6 Elite highs, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.4 ounces, the equivalent of 209 grams. In other words, weight has gone up and not down, 1 gram in the case of the Phantom 6 lows, and 4 grams in the case of the Phantom 6 highs, both amounts of weight that I would argue are pretty insignificant. Across the board, all 4 of these boots are pretty light on feet. You can criticize the look all you want, but when it comes to the fit and feel on feet of the Phantom 6 Elite, whether it's the lows or the highs, there is no denying that it is a huge improvement over the GX2 and honestly, even the GX1. They have changed the shape of the modern Phantom series finally, which I'm very grateful for. Not that it was necessarily bad, but it didn't necessarily work well for my foot type. It just had that kind of pinched, tapered, narrower toe box that I was personally never a big fan of. In the case of the Phantom 6, they've definitely widened the forefoot toe box area, rounded it a little bit as well, added some volume, and in general, the boots just feel significantly more, I don't know that relaxed is the right word at the front, but my feet no longer feel like they're cramped in the toe box area, which has always been the issue with, again, the grip knit era of Nike Phantom models, whether it was GX1, GX2, original Luna, or Luna 2. They just all had that very tapered toe box, which thankfully is gone. Everything else about the fit and width of the Phantom 6 seems to be about the same as the GX1, given the design similarities of the upper construction, a decent amount of width through the midfoot, a decent amount of width through the heel, and in general, this is easily Nike's widest fitting option now. The upper is soft and flexible and generally has that sock-like sensation that you expect from a top-end knitted football boot from Nike. The sole plate, like I mentioned, is more flexible than it was previously. Again, much more like GX1, which once again, I think feels a lot better. As far as a difference in fit and feel between the highs and the lows, truthfully, I really don't think there's much of a difference here. You can definitely tell that there's a little extra material across the top of your foot with the high cut variation just because of the lacing system being anchored to the upper a little bit differently, where like I mentioned earlier, maybe the lows feel a little bit thinner and slightly more connected just due to the nature of the lacing system itself. But again, after playing in both boots, it's really difficult for me to say that I think one feels significantly better or worse than the other. So that really boils down to personal preference in terms of aesthetic, or really whether or not you want the lace cover with the extra grip. For me personally, I'm actually leaning towards the mid-cut variation, which is kind of a bit of a surprise for me because that's not usually the direction that I go into. And then as far as overall width is concerned, obviously if you have extremely wide feet, it would be best to try these on before buying them, but I would argue that in general, these are going to work well for the vast majority of people, even if your feet are on the wider side. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and because of the shaping change to the forefoot and toe box area, the boots actually run a little bit shorter than they have for the last two Phantom generations, where I would say they ran a smidge long, maybe about a quarter size. Not enough for me personally to be able to go down in size, but in the same size 9.5 US that I wore in those boots, these do fit a little bit shorter, where I basically went from having a little bit too much room for my liking to basically no extra room and the perfect fit on this new Phantom 6. But again, that's very much going to be dependent on the specific shape of your feet and how it matches up with the specific shape of these football boots. But in general, I would recommend going true to size if you're planning on picking up a pair of Phantom 6s. So in conclusion, it's pretty simple. If you loved the Phantom GX1, whether it was the lows or the mids, and a lot of people really like those football boots, including myself, I think you are going to be pleasantly surprised with the Phantom 6 because it really does feel like a true successor to that boot rather than what the GX2 and Luna 2 ended up being, which was kind of this weird hybrid of GX1 and Phantom Luna that at the end of the day wasn't a bad pair of football boots, but the Phantom 6 in comparison definitely feels like a really nice improvement. The new shaping is a welcome change as far as I'm concerned. The grip knit is still the star of the show and still a fantastic aspect of this football boot that really does set it apart from all of its competition. I love the fact that you have an option in the high and the low that genuinely offer something different from each other rather than just paying an extra $25 for a collar that does very little. For me, I'm actually surprisingly kind of leaning a little bit more towards the highs than the lows just because, again, I love the idea of being able to tuck my laces in and also have that extra grip across the top of the foot. The boots are lightweight. The traction from the FG stud pattern, while it's maybe not what everybody was hoping for, still offers top-notch performance. And like I said, the sole plate feels a lot better than it did on the previous generation. Where it must be said, you can also get a grip knit upper from the Mercurial series, where if you really want that speed boot feel, that aggressive, locked-in, responsive sensation, the Mercs are definitely still the way to go. However, if you just want that extra grip, but also want to be as comfortable as possible, the Phantom 6 Elite, compared to just about any other football boot on the market, particularly if you like a knitted upper, is an easy go-to option now. If you can get past the way they look, I think you'll be really happy with the way they feel.